There were protests across the nation this weekend over reforms to public sector union contracts, and many protesters claim there's a war being waged against unions. But what about the war unions are waging against taxpayers? Federal public sector workers earn more than up to 20% more than private sector workers in the same job. Public school teachers get tenure after 3 years of service, and cops get to retire in their 40s and earn 80% of their highest paycheck for the rest of their lives. That's just a few of the differences between the public and private sector. Here with me now, the Heritage Foundation Senior Policy Analyst, Jason Richwine. Jason, welcome here. I remember, it wasn't that long ago, when it was a financial sacrifice to work for the government. You did so because you were expert in the field. You loved the idea of helping other people, but you took that sacrifice. It's not a financial sacrifice anymore, is it?
Well, you know, some people still claim that it is. There have been a number of studies from left-leaning think tanks in the past year or so that have claimed that public sector workers are in fact not overpaid, maybe even underpaid compared to private sector workers. But what we've shown at the Heritage Foundation is that those studies drastically undercount the benefit side of the public sector. When you count them all, then it turns out that public sector work is a very good deal.
Because public sector unions, which obviously is not the federal government, but is most of the states, have succeeded in getting elected to public office, Republicans and Democrats, who will reward the union members by giving away taxpayer dollars. Now, it might be scandalous for them to hire a janitor at $150,000 a year, but it wouldn't be scandalous to give the janitor $25,000 or $30,000 worth of benefits, because that doesn't look like it's additional salary. Isn't that the way the politicians in both parties have thought and operated?
That seems to be what's happening. Just take, for one example, retiree health benefits. Some people call it Medigap. It's essentially health care that bridges the gap between retirement and Medicare eligibility. In Wisconsin, teachers get an especially good deal on that. Basically, the retiree health benefits they get are equivalent to about 17% of their annual compensation.
All right, now that good deal does not come from the Constitution. It doesn't come from the natural law. It just comes from what their representatives, their union representatives, were able to extract from prior governors and prior bureaucrats in Wisconsin who gave in to the unions because the unions put them into power. This happens in almost every state in the union, doesn't it?
It seems to be a pretty common occurrence, and what I have to say, about this whole debate is my surprise about the extent to which some defenders of unions have kind of elevated them to almost this sort of paragon of virtue, which I don't understand. Public sector unions are a special interest group, just like any other. They go to Washington, or state capitol in this case, and they pressure lawmakers in order to get as much money as possible, just like any special interest.
All right.
Why they should be considered angelic compared to other special interests, I really have no idea.
I don't know the answer to that either. It'd be good to ask them that. Last question. We have about a minute left.
Sure.
Tell us about the seniority system for promoting and not demoting and not firing with a lot of these unions, particularly teachers' unions. Doesn't this seniority system actually work against rewarding the good and punishing the bad, which is what private industry does with its employees?
Well, of course. In the case of teachers, unfortunately, we pay them according to things that have virtually no effect on student achievement, like tenure, for example, or having a master's degree rather than a bachelor's. There's no relationship to achievement, but we pay for that anyway. It's all part of a job security premium that is just not accounted for in the existing studies. We actually try to put a number on job security, and it's worth quite a bit of money.
Wow. Jason Richwine, it's a pleasure. Good work on that study, and thanks for joining us on Freedom Watch.
Thank you.
Libya on the brink. Colonel Gaddafi is fighting a bloody war against his own people. But what should the U.S. do or not do? More on that after the break. Libya's Colonel Gaddafi and his regime are engaged in a murderous campaign against their own people, whose only so-called crime has been to agitate for their freedom and their natural rights. So what should the United States do in the face of these horrors? In a recent Rasmussen poll, 67% of Americans said the U.S. should leave the situation in Arab countries alone, and only 17% said we should get directly involved. But should America stand by while innocent freedom fighters are slaughtered? Joining us now, the host of Anti-War Radio, Scott Horton. Scott, it's a pleasure. Welcome to Freedom Watch.
Thank you for having me.
Here's the dilemma that I face as a libertarian who believes in small government, who wishes that our relationship with other countries would consist of happy relationship in which we engage in free commerce between them. These people in Libya are obvious monsters, the government, and they obviously are killing innocent people only because these innocents are asking for the natural rights which we take for granted here. Question, should we do anything? Should we send them blackberries? Should we send them cash? Should we send them bullets? Should we send them encouragement? Or should we do nothing and let them die?
Well, the American people certainly should send them encouragement, but our government should not be involved whatsoever. You know, Judge, back in 2003, when Bush normalized relations with Libya, that was fine. We should, as libertarians, of course, encourage the opening of business relationships and that kind of thing. But, of course, they didn't stop there, and they worked to send military aid, non-armament military aid from the Americans, and then they used the British to actually send weapons to Muammar Gaddafi. They can't stand to just be friends again on the normal level. They had to try to turn him into a Hosni Mubarak, one of our military puppets. So here we back the dictatorship in Tunisia and in Egypt and in Yemen and in Bahrain, but somehow our government is on the side of the people in Libya. It doesn't make much sense to me.
All right, well, here we go again. I got to tell you, I didn't know that, and like you, I monitor this stuff for a living. You're telling me that the American government, either directly or indirectly, has supplied Muammar Gaddafi with weaponry. That would be as reprehensible as the American government having supplied Hosni Mubarak, which with the tanks that we thought were going to kill people in Tahrir Square, but didn't. Question, do the Libyan people in the streets, who are literally fighting and dying in a civil war, do they know that the bullets being aimed at them came directly or indirectly from the government of the United States?
Well, you know, through the history, most of Libya's military armaments have come from the Soviet Union and the Russians in the past. But yes, in the past few years, the Americans have been sending training and equipment and arranged for General Dynamics to sell a giant $100 million plus deal for helicopters to go to Muammar Gaddafi there. Whether the people of Egypt know that or the people of Libya understand, apprehend those facts or not, I'm not certain, but they do know for sure, Judge, that America backs every dictatorship from Morocco to Iraq. That we're not on the side of the people of the Middle East. We never have been. We support the dictatorships in every country in the region.
Well, then is Hillary Clinton telling the truth? Is the President of the United States telling the truth when they call for Gaddafi to step down? Or do they want him to step down so that someone of like mind would replace him?
Sure, it's the same thing in Egypt. They didn't even hide it. It was on the front page of the New York Times. They were doing everything they could to keep Mubarak in power, and then failing that, they wanted his head of the secret torture police, Omar Suleiman, to take power. And of course, they want to, try to intervene in Libya in a way to, try to place a good bet on who's going to be next and see whether they can get in good with him. Same thing for Bahrain. If the protesters there or in Yemen, if they're successful in overthrowing the dictatorships we've been supporting thus far, of course they'll be trying to intervene as best they can to make sure to be friends with whoever's next.
It's a very difficult problem. My heart is with the people in the streets, but my head is with you, saying we can't get involved in fights like this, and the people have to decide for themselves. Thank you, Scott. Thank you.
Judge, they don't need our help. The people of Libya are winning, and Gaddafi's days are numbered.
Got it. Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank
you. You're welcome. Now a few items from our Freedom File. Oh, the irony of ironies. The world's preeminent Ponzi scheme expert, the man who oversaw one of the biggest private Ponzi schemes in world history, Bernie Madoff, is sounding off against the biggest Ponzi scheme in human existence, called Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. And just to put it in perspective, Madoff's scheme lost his investors $65 billion. But the total unfunded liability of the federal government, money that the feds have promised to pay but don't have, is almost 1,000 times greater than what Bernie Madoff stole. It's nearly $63 trillion. If Madoff is so hated for his fraud and abuse, why are the feds' feet not held to the fire as well? More importantly, how can the feds morally prosecute Madoff for doing the very same things that they do? In the District of Columbia, residents who wanted to go green were enticed by a city tax credit to purchase solar panels for their homes. But the 51 residents who installed the panels we're going to get stiffed by the government. The D.C. government is facing a huge budget shortfall, and it simply has decided not to pay the $700,000 in tax credits promised to those who purchased the solar panels. Hopefully the people of the nation's capital will learn that their city government can't be trusted. What would happen if the situation were reversed? Imagine the homeowners bought panels from the city and then decided they couldn't pay for them. They'd be arrested or sued. So why shouldn't the bureaucrats who perpetrated this fraud on the homeowners be arrested or sued? Because they work for the government. A New Haven, Connecticut Democratic State Senator Martin Looney has introduced a bill that acknowledges a person's constitutional right to film a police officer in public and on the job. But this bill goes even further. It would strip immunity from police officers who interfere with people who are videoing them. This is a significant point. Currently, if a cop forces someone to put away the camera, or steals or destroys the camera, as they usually do, and the person with the camera sues the cop for violating his First Amendment right to film in public and for taking his property, the cop can ask a judge to throw out the suit because he was just doing his job. If Senator Looney's bill becomes law, such a defense will no longer be available to the police, and the public would have a far better view of what cops do to people when they're doing their jobs. Bills like this one need to be enacted across the country. Police who interfere with people's constitutional rights need to be held accountable, and we all need to know about it. Do we spend enough money on the military? I sure think so. But there are those in the Department of the Defense that want even more money for themselves. And you won't believe how they're trying to get it. Colonel Anthony Schaefer, the man whose book The Pentagon Banned, tells all next.